Something big happened. I was drunk out of my mind when I ran into my childhood friend, who I hadn't seen in years, on the way home. I just threw my arms around him and kissed him repeatedly. The next day, the trending topic exploded. Top-tier male star kisses non-celebrity girlfriend on the street. Clicking on the link, I realized the crazy woman who was all over him, kissing him without a care, was none other than me. And the handsome guy who looked surprisingly happy to be kissed by me was my childhood friend, Mason. I started scrolling through the comments under the post. Your brother clearly got tangled up with this crazy girl. It's so funny. But he looks like he's actually enjoying it. Is the studio dead? Why haven't they released a denial yet? Waiting for an official statement. I slapped my forehead. I had been so drunk yesterday that I had no recollection of what happened after that. As I was trying to recall, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I picked it up, and a deep, magnetic male voice on the other end made my ears tingle. Sober up yet? I paused for a second. Who is this? Guess. Do I really need to guess? I cleared my throat and tried to stay calm before saying his name. Mason. Bingo. I'll reward you by taking you out for dinner tonight. How do you have my number? You were out of it yesterday, so I unlocked your phone and looked at your order history to find your address. I took you home. Mason sounded so innocent. I was silently screaming in my head. Please tell me he didn't go through all the embarrassing stuff in my photo gallery. Wait, how did you know my password? He chuckled lightly, the sound almost teasing. It's your birthday. Took me one try. And what about you? Do you still remember my birthday? Mason celebrates his birthday according to the lunar calendar, and it's so etched in my memory I could never forget it. Without hesitation, I answered firmly, every year on Halloween. He laughed softly, then his tone grew serious. So you've been thinking about me too? I quickly changed the subject to avoid the awkwardness. About the trending topic. What are we going to do about that? Don't worry, my team is already working on the official announcement. Then he suddenly laughed brightly, adding, just kidding. Alright, I'll pick you up for dinner tonight. I've got to go now. Okay, I replied and hung up the phone. I sat there for a while, feeling like I was in a daze, almost like I was sleepwalking. Mason and I grew up together, childhood sweethearts, innocent and carefree. We spent our days joking and causing trouble, and every corner of our small town had traces of our mischief. But before we even finished elementary school, he transferred to another school and moved away, and we lost touch. Years later, after I graduated from college, I moved to N City. I would often see Mason's face on the big screen, but I didn't have his contact information. Besides, Mason had probably forgotten all about me by then. I'm just an ordinary person, and I didn't want to make a scene over a big celebrity. Until last night, when our parallel lives crossed paths again. As soon as it got dark, I received a call from Mason. His voice was a little out of breath, like he just finished something, and he sounded a little excited. I'm coming over now, get ready. Where are we going to eat? Just follow me. When it was time, I was sitting bored on a bench in a convenience store when someone lightly tapped me on the shoulder. I turned around, and there he was, Mason. He had one hand on the table, leaning in to look at me. His face was getting closer, and even though he had a mask on, his delicate eyes and brows were still recognizable. He looked at me seriously, then even reached up to pinch my cheek with a smile. Our Emma's all grown up, but still just as cute as before. My cheeks turned red, and I quickly looked around to make sure no one could see Mason. Let's go, time to eat. I stood up and gave him a light push, but he stretched his arm out and pulled me into his embrace, glaring at me with mock hurt. Bad woman, you weren't so cold last night. I punched him playfully, silently thinking, please don't say any more. Sitting in a private room at an upscale restaurant, I watched as the big star Mason lowered his head to order food, feeling a little out of it. Just then, a message popped up on my phone. It was from my boss, Harrison. He had a cold, intimidating face that could lower the surrounding pressure by 3 points, yet still managed to win the hearts of many girls with his flawless appearance. He was the CEO of Future Group. His message was brief, but had an undeniable sense of urgency. Come to my office to work overtime tonight. I was taken aback by his boldness, like he didn't even care about labor laws, so I replied with a, are you okay? Emoji. Normally, I wouldn't have any daily contact with someone like Harrison, except for work-related matters. But ever since I caught him in the act of scolding the company's mascot cat for stealing my cookie and I gave the cat a stern warning, Harrison happened to see it. Now, whenever I saw him at the office, his gaze would linger on me for a few extra seconds, and the atmosphere would freeze for a moment. Another message from Harrison came through. It's fine if you don't work overtime. My cat misses you. Before I could reply, I suddenly felt a weight on my shoulder. Mason had somehow sat beside me, resting his head on my left shoulder, and I almost stopped breathing from the shock. His eyes were striking, and not long ago his cameo in a TV drama with just a few seconds of intense gazing shot the show to third place on the trending charts and gained him countless new fans. The show, which started with no hype, was now ranked fourth on the popular list. At that moment, those dark eyes were staring at me with an unreadable expression. He asked without any change in his face, "Why are you so nervous? Got a boyfriend?" I shook my head quickly. He pointed his chin toward my phone, seemingly asking casually, "Who's this?" I forced out a few laughs. "It's my boss. He wants me to work overtime tonight." "Overtime at his house?" I awkwardly smiled again, but my smile started to stiffen. "Ah, that's just how he is. He likes to joke around." After laughing, I felt a bit annoyed with myself. Why am I being so eager to explain everything? Mason laughed too, but his eyes had no warmth in them. He reached out and grabbed my phone, then sent a voice message to Harrison. "Got a boyfriend? Stop bothering me." I sucked in a sharp breath, quickly grabbing my phone back and trying to retract the voice message, but it was too late. Harrison had already called me. I glanced coldly at the phone in my hand while Mason, without hesitation, pressed the speakerphone button and answered. "Where are you?" Harrison's voice came through, deep and commanding, giving off a sense of authority without even needing to raise his voice. "In my arms." Mason replied with a laugh, then continued, "Are you done yet? We've already responded to you after work hours. That's enough face for you. Just a little overtime pay? I'll transfer you 10 times the amount later. Stop bothering us." His tone was relaxed and casual, but the temperature in his voice was far from warm. With every word he said, I could feel sweat pooling on my back. "Emma," Harrison said, "I'm waiting for your call." It seemed like Harrison didn't intend to waste time talking to Mason any further. After leaving a short sentence, he hung up. I sighed and locked my phone, looking at Mason with a helpless expression. "Is this fun, little troublemaker?" Mason blinked and gave me a mischievous smile. "So fun. You really spoil me, sis." Before I could respond, his phone rang. After picking it up, his agent's frantic voice came through. "Don't leave the restaurant. There are paparazzi outside everywhere." Mason ended the call, took 2 or 3 steps toward the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked down. Sure enough, at the entrance of the building and across the street, there were people crouched with long lenses, cameras, and video equipment. A few curious passers-by were also craning their necks, trying to see what was going on. Thankfully, the restaurant was on a high floor and the glass design was perfect. People inside could enjoy the city's nightscape, but those outside couldn't see inside. I sighed, still uneasy, but Mason seemed unfazed. He rubbed my head with a smirk. I grumbled and bumped my head against the glass, my face sour. "Are we even going to be able to leave this building tonight? I need to catch the subway early tomorrow." "You're so focused on your career?" Mason scoffed with a chuckle. He reached out to protect my forehead from hitting the glass and raised an eyebrow, glancing at the crowd below. "Don't worry, I'll protect you." At that moment, the door was knocked on and the waiter entered to serve the dishes. I quickly turned my back, worried my face might be seen. I thought to myself, "Please, I really don't want to be on trending again." Mason looked at me, laughed, and shook his head, then straightened me up. The waiter, with excellent professionalism, placed the dishes down without a word, leaving with a sweet tone. "Your meal is ready. If you need anything, just ring the bell." Then they turned and exited. I breathed a sigh of relief. Just as I was sitting back down, Mason, lazily resting his chin on his hand, said, "You're so nervous just from having dinner with me. Next time I'll just come over and cook for you." I scooped a spoonful of creamy soup and brought it to my mouth, replying helplessly, "Big shot, I'm just an ordinary person. I don't want my home address exposed." He curled his lips into a small smile, looking pleased, then "Coming to my place is fine too." I immediately choked on the food I hadn't swallowed yet and shot him a glare. He put on an innocent face. "We've kissed already. Now the whole world knows I'm your guy. Your house, my house, it's the same. Stop joking." I was almost on the verge of tears. With Mason's current fame, as long as his team didn't issue a statement, the trending topic would stay up. So, what should we do about the trending topic? Should we tell the media you kissed me but don't plan to take responsibility? Just as I was seriously considering the validity of that suggestion, Mason interrupted my thoughts. "Alright, stop thinking about it. Let's eat and relax." He raised an eyebrow, picked up a bottle of red wine and poured a little into the wine glass. There was a hint of an unreadable smile in his eyes as he asked, "Want to drink more?" I shook my head vigorously. After dinner, Mason was the one who got drunk this time. His words became fewer, his gaze a little unfocused, and he rested his head on his hand. I watched him, half-dazed and tired, a little surprised. Seems like his alcohol tolerance isn't as good as I thought. I walked over and gently tapped him, calling his name a couple of times. He didn't respond, still with his eyes closed. Sighing, I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down. There were fewer people now, but the scene was still intense, with the kind of won't leave until I get a shot attitude. Truly a top star. As I shook my head in amazement, suddenly, a pair of hands wrapped around my waist, pulling me tightly into his embrace. Emma, why didn't you look for me all these years? Mason's voice was low and husky. However, when he speaks normally, his voice is clear and clean, full of youthful energy, which is why his fans refer to him as a heartthrob in the industry. But unexpectedly, when drunk, his voice becomes deep and magnetic. You don't miss me at all? He nuzzled my neck, his voice full of a subtle pout. A tingle spread through my body, and I had to lean against the glass with one hand, while the other reached back to pat his head, gently soothing him. I do miss you. I thought you had forgotten about me. He kept nuzzling my neck, muttering, You're lying. You just know how to flatter me. Bad woman. Then, as if in a fit of frustration, he pulled me even closer, saying, If you missed me, you would have come to find me. Don't you know? I check my DMs every day just hoping to find you. His words were a little unclear, slurred from the alcohol. The mix of alcohol and his hot, steady breath filled the air. I decided to treat it like he was just drunk and tried to wiggle free from his embrace. Let go of me for a second. I can't stand properly, I said anxiously. No, first tell me you miss me, Mason insisted, refusing to let go. I miss you, I replied, switching hands to lean against the glass, and hurriedly answered him. He asked again, Who do you miss? I miss Mason. I cried out almost desperately. It seemed like Mason was finally going to let go as he chuckled softly in my ear, the sound full of teasing. Then he straightened up, placing an arm around my shoulders to steady me. With a playful grin, he said, Got it. Let's go now, I'll take you home. Now. I was a little surprised, glancing down at the crowd. Are you sure? Mason put on his mask, casually fixed his hair, and draped an arm over my shoulder. He leaned in closer, acting as if he were uncomfortable, and closed his eyes, saying, Help me out. I nodded, a bit exhausted, and helped him walk toward the elevator. He pressed the button for the basement, and in the underground parking lot, I saw his assistant standing anxiously beside a Bentley. The assistant saw us, nodded at me, and said a few words. Hello, sister. Then he quickly ran over to help Mason. But Mason pushed his hand away, pulled a car key from his pocket, and threw it to him, lazily saying, Find some time to drive the car parked out front back to my place. I have to meet the director later about the contract for the new film. The assistant nodded, replying, Got it. I just called, the director is on his way to the hotel now. First take her home, Mason said, then opened the back door of the car for me. His eyes had cleared up, and the drunken state from earlier had completely disappeared. I sat in the car, staring at him in shock. Weren't you drunk? He got in beside me, leaning against me with a calm expression. If I was really drunk, how could I get you to obediently say you missed me? I was speechless for a while, choosing not to respond to him, and turned my head to look out the window. Mason didn't say anything either, unusually quiet by my side, until the car stopped downstairs at my building. I turned to look at him, only to find that he had actually fallen asleep. His eyes were closed, breathing slow and steady, long lashes resting gently on his cheeks, looking serene and peaceful. I'm here, I softly tapped him. Mason's eyelids fluttered, and he frowned as he opened his eyes. After a moment, he took my wrist and lifted my hand, pressing it gently to his warm face. His voice was a little hoarse as he said, Remember to call me. I squeezed his cheek, softly replying, Okay. After getting home, I took a shower, lay down on the bed, and glanced at the trending topics again. I found that the search about Mason and me had already been taken down. On the live feed, his fans were writing messages. I clicked on a few of his food photos, which looked as stunning as a celestial being from the heavens. In the end, feeling extremely tired, I followed a few accounts on Mason's homepage. Then I drifted into a deep sleep. The next day when I arrived at the office, I noticed everyone was looking at me strangely. Although I had mentally prepared myself before coming in, it was still a little awkward. A colleague came over with a gossiping face. Did you see the news this past weekend? That global superstar Mason was caught kissing someone on the street, and the side profile of that girl looks so much like you. I even saved the picture. I was taken aback for a moment, but when I saw he only said it looked like me and didn't actually recognize me, I pretended to be surprised and played along. Really? I didn't know about that. Are you sure it's not you? At first it really shocked me. It looks so much like you, he said. Then my colleague brought his phone closer to show me the photo. Thankfully, the photo only captured my side profile, and because of the dim lighting and the distance, it was blurry, making it hard to tell whether it was really me. My heart finally calmed down. I was about to laugh and joke about it when another female colleague who I didn't get along with sneered beside me, "Come on, that's Mason. How could Emma have the connections to get close to such a big star? It's like a little ugly duck dreaming of becoming a swan. There's a limit to everything. If she could be with Mason, I'd fly to the US tomorrow and marry Keanu Reeves." Another female colleague couldn't help but chime in, agreeing with her. I couldn't be bothered. I just pretended I didn't hear them. But my good colleague who was standing next to me looked awkward, clearly uncomfortable with this little drama happening around me. I smiled at him and patted his shoulder. "Go on and get to work." Just then the CEO's secretary came in. She expressionlessly placed a file on the desk and, in a voice loud enough for the whole office to hear, coldly addressed the colleague who had just mocked me. "The boss is extremely dissatisfied with your team's proposal. Rework it." The boss's exact words were, "If you can't handle this salary, you'd better leave. The company doesn't keep people who aren't contributing." As soon as she finished, the whole office fell silent. I nonchalantly rested my head on my hand, focusing on my work. However, the secretary came over to my side and gently knocked on my desk. "Emma, the boss would like to see you in his office," she said. I was a bit confused but nodded and followed her to the top floor of the building. I knocked on the CEO's office door and heard a low, clear voice saying, "Come in." I opened the door and walked inside. Harrison was sitting in the CEO chair, exuding a cold, sharp aura. His face was expressionless, and his dark eyes were deep and inscrutable. After I entered, he simply said, "Come here." I walked forward, feeling completely uncomfortable, and said, "Mr. Harrison, you wanted to see me?" I stopped in front of his desk and Harrison fixed his gaze on me, his eyes sharp. In a low voice he asked, "Who were you with last night?" "Hi, friend," I answered calmly. "Is it this friend?" He handed me a phone, and on the screen was the photo of Mason and me that had gone viral. I let out an awkward laugh and continued playing dumb. "Impossible. I just went out to dinner with a friend last night, and the person in this photo isn't me. Isn't it?" Harrison took the phone back, his tone indifferent. "I just checked. Your height is 168 centimeters, exactly one head shorter than his. The side profile is almost identical. That light blue lace short-sleeve shirt is also something you've worn before." I was completely stunned, my mind screaming for help. Harrison leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk, and asked, "What is he to you?" I sighed in resignation. "We're childhood friends. We used to play together when we were little." "Boss, you're not going to fire me just because of this photo, right? Be careful, I might report you to the Labor Bureau." After a moment, a faint smile finally appeared on his face, but it was laced with sarcasm. "I'm just curious. You went ahead and kissed him in public. Are you that desperate for a man?" I was genuinely a little angry, mumbling under my breath, careful not to let him hear. "If you can't say anything nice, just don't speak." But the ingrained work ethic and fear of this powerful CEO made me hesitate to lash out. I forced a stiff smile and said, "If you say so." Meanwhile, my mind was cursing 1,000 times over. Desperate for a man? Sure, but what's wrong with kissing a handsome guy, right? Harrison's face instantly darkened, his already intense gaze now filled with a kind of anger I couldn't quite read. I didn't want to stick around a second longer. I took a deep breath, managed to force out one last sentence. "Mr. Harrison, unless there's anything else, I'll get back to work." I turned to leave. "Wait." Just as I was about to walk out, he called me back. I took a deep breath, forced myself to calm down, quickly adjusted my expression and turned back with a smile, waiting for him to speak. To my surprise, Harrison's expression softened significantly, and in a calm, measured tone he said, "Next week the company has a shipment project. I need you to come with me to Dujaima for a business trip." "But boss, I'm in the planning department," I protested. "From now on you'll be my personal assistant. Your salary and bonuses are tripled. For this project it'll just be you and the legal team coming with me." "Get ready," he replied, not missing a beat. I hesitated for just a second, but my brain had already started doing the math. Tripling my salary. I'd be making a small fortune by the end of the quarter, especially with the bonuses. "You'll move to the office there tomorrow," he added, pointing with his chin toward a vacant small office next to us. From that angle I could tell he'd have a perfect view of everything I did there. I swallowed hard, and the thought of that tripled salary had me completely bent. Trying to play it cool, I nodded stiffly, "Yes, Mr. Harrison." As I agreed, he added, "No need to wait until tomorrow. You can move now. Also, tonight after work, wait for me at the company entrance. I need you to pick up my cat and take it to your place." He handed me a card without any expression, and in the same emotionless tone he said, "I'm busy. I don't have time to take care of it. This card has 500,000 on it. Consider it money for cat food and a little thank you bonus." Oh my god. My boss. That cat's worth more than my life. I shakily took the card, clutching it tightly in my hand. If I'd known today was going to make me rich, I would have skipped that cheap subway fare and taken a cab instead. With a forced smile, I practically groveled. "Anything else, boss?" "No, just go," he said, dismissing me. Harrison shot me a cold glance, though his expression softened a bit compared to before. "All right," I nodded, walking out the door with a satisfied smile. The sudden influx of money had made me a little unsteady on my feet, and by the time I got to the end of the workday I was feeling a bit dizzy. I stood at the company entrance, arms crossed, leaning against a stone pillar, waiting for Harrison in complete boredom. Just then, the two colleagues I've never gotten along with, the sisters, walked out of the building arm in arm. When they saw me, they put on fake smiles and greeted me, but the sarcasm was unmistakable. "Emma, waiting for someone? Your boyfriend? Please don't tell me it's Mason. If you see him, can you get me a couple of signed photos?" The mention of Mason immediately turned heads from passers-by. They strolled over, casually linking their arms with mine, grinning like they were in on some joke. "Sure, but if I ask him for an autograph, he might think you're too dirty for him to bother with," I replied with a calm smile. "Emma, you really do have some nerve, don't you? Take a look at yourself." The sisters turned on me in an instant, and the arm they had around me quickly pushed me away. I lost my balance and bumped into the stone pillar behind me, letting out a quiet grunt from the pain. I was a little surprised. These two crazy women really dared to lay hands on me. At that moment, the sound of a car horn blared loudly, catching everyone's attention. We all looked in the direction of the noise, and it was unmistakable. It was Harrison's Rolls-Royce. The two women quickly stepped back, putting some distance between us, glaring at me with fury. They tried to act casual, but the tension was obvious. Harrison rolled down the car window, his face as cold as ever, his already indifferent expression looking even darker. The two sisters forced out fake smiles. "Hello, Mr. Harrison." Harrison didn't even acknowledge them, his voice flat and uninterested. "Emma, how long are you going to stand there like an idiot?" Hearing his command, I immediately stepped forward, jogging over to the passenger seat and getting in quickly. Through the window, I flashed a victorious hand gesture at the two women, who were left standing there, stunned and looking green with envy. Harrison glanced at me briefly, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. Drama queen. I fiddled with the card in my pocket, feeling in a great mood, not bothered at all. I turned my head, looking out at the passing scenery. Harrison's house was a true mansion, an impressive 3-story villa out in the suburbs. The interior had a stylish, Italian-inspired luxury feel, with a touch of his personal flair, cold, minimalist, and almost aesthetic. Harrison led me into a room, and to my surprise, the decor here was completely different from the rest of the house. The walls were a soft pink, and there were even fluffy pom-poms and various cat climbing frames, all in pink. It was like stepping into a dream room straight out of a teenage girl's fantasy. As I walked in, a little blue-eyed ragdoll cat with tiny legs waddled toward me, its feet pattering on the floor. It was none other than Tuan, the mascot I'd once grabbed by the scruff and scolded. Inside, I was screaming internally, "Help me!" If I'd known this spoiled cat's room was bigger than my entire apartment, I never would have dared mess with it. But Tuan didn't hold a grudge. It happily snuggled up to me, affectionately licking the back of my hand. "She really likes you, so I'm leaving her with you for now," Harrison said, standing in the doorway with his usual calm demeanor. No problem," I replied, playing with the kitten. Just then, my phone suddenly buzzed with an unusually loud vibration. The screen displayed "strong reminder." I opened it to find a message from Mason. I stared at it for a moment, wondering just what he had done to my phone while I was drunk. "Work's done. The lunch was so spicy I got a pimple. What are you doing? Pay attention to me." Then a selfie from Mason popped up. One of those typical guy selfies with the camera angle just right to show off a pimple on his cheek, his face turned slightly to the side as if he was doing me a favor by letting me see it. Looked a little silly, but somehow it was kind of endearing in its own way. I was about to reply when a low voice suddenly came from behind me. "What are you laughing at?" I was just watching the news. I instinctively locked my phone, silently vowing to buy a privacy screen protector tonight. "You're laughing at the news?" Harrison was speechless for a moment. "I'm just happy to see the country doing well." I forced myself to remain calm. I cradled the kitten in my arms, scratching its chin, and asked, "Is there anything else I need to bring?" Harrison gave a succinct answer as usual: cat carrier, toys, and the food and snacks it's used to. "From now on, just buy that brand." I nodded, gathering the items and placing them in the back seat of the car. Harrison then drove me back to my place. When we got downstairs, I politely said, "Well, Harrison, I'll take Tuan inside now." He didn't say anything, just parked the car and got out with me. I was standing there confused when he furrowed his brows and coldly asked, Are you really going to carry all that on your own? Oh right, thanks Harrison, I said, giving him a thankful glance. Harrison wasn't impressed though. He grabbed a large cat carrier and a bag of odds and ends, motioning for me to lead the way. Lead the way, he said flatly. I rented a small duplex on the 11th floor, not very spacious. As I got off the elevator, I looked down, rummaging through my bag for the keys. But as I did, I accidentally bumped into a chest, flat and firm, which made me stumble back a few steps. I looked up and saw a man wearing a fisherman's hat and a black mask, his eyes hidden. He was casually dressed, obviously someone just out for a walk. Sorry about that, I quickly apologized. I tried to sidestep him and head toward my door, but before I could, he grabbed my arm and pulled me back. Look where you're going, a muffled voice came from beneath the mask. The next moment he pulled off his hat and mask, revealing freshly styled hair and a familiar handsome face. There was even a pimple on his right cheek. It was Mason. What the hell? Are you tired of being a celebrity and now you've turned into a stalker? I couldn't help but ask as I met his gaze. Didn't I tell you I was coming over for dinner? Mason grinned, casually draping his arm over my shoulder. And by the way, why haven't you replied to my messages? When did you say you were coming over for dinner? I asked, suspiciously trying to recall. Yesterday. Hurry up and open the door. But halfway through his sentence he suddenly froze and his hand tightened on my shoulder. Emma, you have company, Mason said with a mocking tone, his words dripping with challenge. I turned to follow his gaze and saw Harrison walking over calmly, carrying the things he'd brought, his expression still as composed as ever. I shot Mason a sharp look and muttered under my breath, "That's my boss, the god of wealth." I quickly opened the door and Mason, ever the gentleman, took long strides and walked right in. But Harrison, without missing a beat, placed the items on the ground just outside the door. Thanks Harrison. Please come in and sit down, I invited, feeling a bit awkward as I picked up the things. No need, Harrison replied nonchalantly. You seem pretty close to your friend. His tone wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. He gave me an unreadable look before suddenly leaning in closer. He raised his hand to adjust my already neat collar, and his warm fingertips brushed over my collarbone. I instinctively stepped back. Harrison. I didn't understand what was going on, a little shocked by his sudden closeness. Harrison's breath was near my ear as he lowered his voice. Make sure you take care of my cat. Before I could say anything, Mason's lazy voice came from inside. Hey Harrison, aren't you coming in for a drink? I instinctively pushed Harrison away, but immediately worried I might have pushed the god of wealth too hard, like seeing my 500,000 fly away with wings. But Harrison didn't seem to care. He raised his voice slightly, calling back to the apartment. Mason, maybe you should focus on thinking about the potential collaboration with Future Group. With that he turned and left. My mind was full of question marks. What collaboration? After Harrison left, I watched Mason wandering around my apartment holding the kitten in his arms while wearing cartoon slippers that were clearly too big for him. I poured him a glass of water and placed it on the coffee table, then curiously asked, what kind of collaboration are you talking about with our company? It's a collaboration for endorsing your new products, Mason replied, inspecting an oil painting hanging on the wall. After examining it, he lifted the kitten and showed it the painting, nodding thoughtfully. Nice taste. I rolled my eyes at him. Can you even understand it? After his little tour, Mason set the kitten down and sat beside me, lounging back on the sofa. He lazily asked, what's for dinner tonight? McDonald's. Just as I was focused on choosing my McDonald's meal, I felt a tickling sensation on the back of my neck. Startled, I turned my head to see Mason gently brushing the back of my neck with a cat toy. I don't want McDonald's, he murmured, his voice low and coaxing. I want to eat what you cook, sister. Is that okay? The sensation made me shiver and I couldn't quite resist it. I sighed. There's no food at home. How about I make you some egg noodles? Mason blinked. That works. I sighed again and started getting busy in the kitchen. As I was cracking the eggs, Mason suddenly wrapped his arms around me from behind, and I was completely enveloped by his scent. Did he touch you anywhere earlier? Mason asked, his voice low and intense. What? I jumped slightly and my hand shook, causing the whole egg to drop into the pan, shell and all. Harrison, did he touch you anywhere? Mason's voice was now chillingly cold. No, he just told me to take care of his cat, I hurriedly explained. Mason seemed unsure whether to believe me, letting out a low, mocking hum. This bowl's yours. I pointed to the egg in the pan, still in a daze. Mason laughed quietly in my ear, then said my name softly, Emma. I felt a bit uncomfortable being held like this, my hand nervously stirring the thin noodles in the pan. I pretended to be casual and asked, do you guys know each other? It feels like enemies meeting. Mason fell silent for a while before speaking. We met when we were kids. Did I meet him too? I asked. Since Mason had met him, I thought maybe I had as well. No, it was after I moved away. Oh. I bent down to grab a bowl from the cabinet, using it as an excuse to slip out of his embrace. Mason shrugged indifferently. How about I take you to a concert next week? Whose? My eyes lit up, but then I quickly deflated. But I have to go on a business trip with Harrison to Dujima. His eyes darkened just a little and his smile faded. He looked at me steadily and asked, why does he need to take you on a business trip? I'm his personal assistant now. The money I'll make will be 3 times what I used to get. I nervously avoided his gaze. Since I reconnected with Mason, there's always been this inexplicable tension between us. I was drawn to the kind of relationship that seemed to go beyond friendship, drawn to the feeling of basking in the light of his celebrity status. But this weightless, fluttering sensation made me feel like I was walking a dangerous line. One moment falling into a grand party and the next drowning in the deep sea, floating up and down until I suffocate. I didn't know what Mason was thinking. His words always seemed so light and I dared not respond. For me, the cost of trial and error here was too high. The way you shine in the crowd, yet you only see the ordinary me. The Cinderella story was always fictional, an illusion. Maybe it was best to just leave it here. Mason didn't say anything. I braved the chilly atmosphere and placed the noodles into the bowls, only to hear him helplessly say, "Weekend, are you free? Beyoncé's 20th anniversary tour, front row seats. Aren't you tempted?" I looked up in shock. Really? Then I'm definitely free. Honestly, no one could resist. Beyoncé was an undisputed megastar, with fans ranging from 80-year-olds to 8-year-olds, and her concerts were often sold out in minutes. All right, but there's one condition. Mason casually placed the 2 bowls of noodles on the small coffee table in the living room. Anything you say. I exaggeratedly bowed to him, speaking respectfully. My new drama starts shooting tomorrow. Come visit the set with me tomorrow night. Deal. Only then did Mason finally take a bite of his noodles. After a brief pause, he met my eager gaze and said, "Want to hear the truth?" I nodded. "This bowl of noodles isn't as good as mine." He said it with calm confidence. Pfft. After we finished eating, Mason didn't stay long as he had to head to the set hotel. Before leaving, he ruffled my hair and said, "Work hard, don't think about anyone else." I didn't respond. He lifted my chin, forcing me to meet his gaze. "Did you hear me?" I smiled and said, "Got it." The next day, as soon as I arrived at the office, I started packing my things. In front of the entire company, I moved into the CEO's office. Just before I left, I overheard a few whispers. "She must be taken care of by Mr. Harrison." "Definitely." I turned around, flashed them a bright smile and walked out without looking back. Upon reaching the top floor, I knocked on Harrison's office door. "Mr. Harrison, I've moved in." Harrison didn't even look up, still focused on his work. I walked into the small office in the corner that was now mine and began putting my things in place. Just then someone knocked on the door. A woman with an elegant demeanor walked in, smiling politely but with a slight distance to her. "Hi, Mr. Harrison asked me to show you the ropes." After some conversation, I learned that she was Rowan, the former assistant to the president, now promoted to the deputy director position. From office meeting notes to business dinners, after a whole morning of guidance, the time had flown by. I rubbed my eyes, which were a little sore from the information overload. Rowan smiled and said, "That's it for today, let's go have lunch. I'll leave you to it now." "Thank you, Rowan." I smiled at her gratefully. Though I was tired, I couldn't help but feel excited, like I had just taken a huge step forward. After finishing the paperwork, I walked out of the office, only to find Harrison had not left yet. This time he finally looked up at me and handed me a thick stack of documents. "Here's the project info for next week's acquisition plan, some basic outlines and SWOT analysis. Write me a feasibility report." "Got it, Mr. Harrison." Harrison in work mode was even colder, his presence strong and intimidating. "Don't go into too much detail. We'll discuss the specifics after next week's on-site inspection." I followed suit, keeping my response brief. "Understood." He raised one hand to his temple and his voice softened a little. "Have you eaten yet?" I shook my head. "Not yet." Harrison stood up, his expression unchanged as he walked over to me. "Then let's go together." He took me to a luxurious Western restaurant near the company. We barely exchanged a few words during the entire meal. I still couldn't adjust to the near-silent atmosphere. Inside, I silently groaned and vowed never to have a meal with Harrison again. I'd rather eat McDonald's downstairs by myself. In the elevator, he broke the silence. "Do you have time tonight?" "I'm meeting a friend tonight," I answered politely. Harrison scoffed. You can just say it's Mason. I didn't know how to respond to that. Emma, stay away from him. He's not someone to be messed with, Harrison said, staring at my face, his expression a bit dark and unreadable. Of course, that's just my advice. I wanted to ask more, but the elevator arrived. Harrison didn't wait for me and walked out, leaving me standing there, confused. After work that evening, I went home, petted the kitten, and fed her some cat food and treats. Be good at home, I'll be back soon. I scratched her chin and the kitten purred, rubbing my hand. I followed the address Mason sent me, took a cab to his film set. As soon as I got out of the car and walked toward the entrance, the security guard stopped me. We're filming inside. Visitors can't enter. I quickly explained, I'm here to visit someone. Who are you visiting? I've been ordered not to let anyone in. Mason, I'm here to see Mason. The guard gave me a strange look, filled with skepticism and disdain. Little girl, you should go back. I stop hundreds of fans like you every day. Just when I didn't know what to do, someone hurriedly walked up, smiling at the security guard. Hi, I'm taking someone in. It was Mason's assistant. He saw me, nodded and greeted me. Emma, I'll take you inside. So, under the guard's surprised gaze, I followed the assistant into the makeup room where I saw Mason. He had his eyes closed, head slightly tilted, showing off his sharp jawline. The makeup artist was lightly brushing his face with skillful motions. He hardly needed makeup. The effect was barely noticeable. When he opened his eyes again, the makeup room was empty except for me, and the assistant had discreetly left. You're here, he said with a slight smile, casually picking up the script and sitting beside me. Help me run through the lines. He handed me a copy. I looked at it, slightly awkward. I don't know how. He chuckled, casually saying, just read the female lead's lines. I cleared my throat and slowly said the first line of the scene, only 5 words. Is something wrong? This scene was about the female lead returning from a class reunion, unexpectedly meeting her neighbor in the hallway. He was a former high school classmate who had bullied her, and also the male lead of this drama. Mason immediately slipped into character, his face taking on a strange expression, filled with coldness and fierceness. He stared at me intensely, his voice unusually deep. Just got back. I didn't speak, and neither did the female lead in the script. Mason brushed the bangs from my forehead, leaned closer and sniffed my scent with a half-smile on his lips. You look so good, where did you go? I stiffly replied, none of your business. Mason didn't get angry. Instead, he took another step closer, the pressure mounting. He lightly laughed. Are you nervous? Do you think I'll do something to you? In the script, the female lead instinctively trembled, as if trapped, unable to move, a consequence of past trauma. The male lead pinned the female lead against the wall in the hallway, his voice soft and smooth but full of hidden danger. Don't be afraid, I'll take care of you. At this point, the male lead had his arms around the female lead's waist, his head buried in her neck. Mason too was closing the distance. I was backed against the couch with no way to retreat. I could only look at him in disbelief and gently push against him. Mason grabbed my wrist, lifted my neck, forcing me to stay in place, not allowing me to move further back. My heart raced uncontrollably, every look and touch sending sparks flying. The skin on my wrist felt like it was burning, the heat radiating from it. His face slowly came closer, and finally, unable to hold back, I closed my eyes, bracing for Mason's kiss that felt like it might never come. I could even feel his breath just inches away, but the next moment, I heard a low laugh from him. His voice was husky. Emma, you're sweating a lot. I suddenly opened my eyes, instantly snapping back to reality, pushing him away as if waking from a dream. Shit, Mason feigned pain, then shot me a wronged look. Bad woman, that hurt so much. I kept my composure, adjusting my heartbeat and breath, and said dryly, you're supposed to be reading your lines, why did you get so close? Mason had already sat back leisurely with an air of confidence, calmly replying, the script demands it. At that moment, there was a knock on the door and a staff member politely called out, is Mr. Mason in there? The director wants to see you, we're about to start filming. Mason straightened his collar and glanced at me. Later, you won't be able to enter the set. I'll have my assistant send you home. A wave of unexplained disappointment washed over me. I stood there, staring blankly, and murmured, okay. He raised an eyebrow, a faint smile flickering in his eyes. Did you want me to kiss you just now? If you dare kiss me, I'll punch you. I turned my head away, awkwardly responding. You punch me? I'm not afraid of pain. This face is insured, he said with a carefree smile. I'm going ahead, be safe on your way home. I nodded, watching Mason's back as he left, slowly raising my hand to cover my face. That night, I had a strange and vivid dream. In it, Mason pinned me inside the empty makeup room, kissing me relentlessly. Outside, the crowd bustled and the sound of knocking on the door urged him to stop. But he ignored it, biting my lips fiercely as if to swallow me whole. When I woke up in the morning, I lingered on the dream, staring at the ceiling in despair. This was really a mess. Life's rhythm gradually progressed, and soon, I would be heading to Dujima with Harrison. On the first day of our trip in business class, I absent-mindedly gazed out the window at the clouds. Harrison's cold voice brought me back to reality. "What are you thinking about?" I turned my head and awkwardly smiled at him. "Nothing." He didn't bother looking at me, keeping his eyes on the documents related to the acquisition. Once we landed, the project work went smoothly, from field inspections to business negotiations to signing contracts, all within 3 days. Harrison seemed noticeably more relaxed, deciding to spend 2 days unwinding in Dujima before heading back to City S. The 2 girls from the legal team were already excitedly planning their itinerary, while I still felt somewhat drained. That evening, Harrison took me to try Dujima's famous food street. I had a plum cake in one hand and a cup of lemon tea in the other. Looking at Harrison's indifferent expression, I couldn't help teasing him. I thought Mr. Harrison didn't eat anything from this world. Tonight, the moon was out, its pale white light blending with the yellowish street lamps, casting a cool glow on his tall figure. He didn't eat much, just kept me company as we wandered around. Finally, we sat by the music fountain in the central square. I was focused on munching on the duck neck in my hand, and Harrison glanced at me, his expression unusually gentle. "Is it good?" "Yes, it's good. Do you want some?" "I still have some gloves." I eagerly offered him a bag of duck necks. "No thank you," Harrison shook his head. "Something on your mind?" I didn't say anything, silently continuing to eat. "Work's handled well, but clearly your mind is elsewhere," he continued. It was rare for Harrison to speak so much outside of work, and I found myself grinning slightly, wanting to laugh. But then his next words stopped me from smiling. "Are you thinking about him?" "Who is he?" "We all know the answer." I lost all interest in the duck neck, silently shaking my head. During these days of business trips, I stared at my phone screen countless times, but never received what I was hoping for. Mason's filming schedule seemed to be very busy, and I secretly hoped to get some glimpses of his life. Maybe a complaint about a bad lunch, a joke about a picky director, or some other mundane thing. But none of that came. Actually, I could take the initiative, like sending a picture of Dujima's scenery right now, demanding to know, "What are you doing?" It would be perfectly reasonable and not overstepping. But I didn't even know what I was thinking. Harrison asked, "How long have you known each other?" I tilted my head, thinking back. When I was 6, I was playing hopscotch alone in my grandmother's yard when suddenly a remote-controlled car crashed into my leg. When I looked up, all I saw was a little bundle wrapped in thick clothes, with a cotton hat and a fluffy scarf, revealing a soft, pale face. At the time, I was taller than Mason, and seeing a stranger excited me. I curiously approached and asked, "Who are you?" Mason looked up, squinted, and smiled at me. "I'm Mason." "I'm Emma." From that moment on, he would randomly run to my grandmother's yard, tug at the door, stretch his neck inside, and loudly call my name, "Emma, come out and play." Mason seemed to have no parents. He always called a kind-faced woman Nanny. Coincidentally, I also had no parents, so my grandmother took care of Mason with great affection. Time flew by and he stopped calling me sister. Our relationship went through cycles of love, dislike, reconciliation, breakups, and more, but we never really separated. Until the day of the final exams in 6th grade, when he ran into my grandmother's yard with red eyes and said, "I'm leaving." And then he really left, picked up by a grand-looking 4-wheel car, and even though my grandmother had cooked, he didn't stay to eat. Has it been almost 20 years? I smiled bitterly and said to Harrison, "I've known him for almost 15 years. Harrison replied. I was a bit surprised, then remembered what he'd said earlier about Mason not being a good guy, and my curiosity about him increased. Suddenly, all the lights in the central square went out, and the sound of a cello filled the air. The crowd was silent for a second before erupting into joy again, with people in medieval masks dancing around the fountain. A flower seller approached us with a basket of lit-up flowers, enthusiastically offering Harrison, "Sir, would you like to buy a bouquet for your girlfriend? It's very romantic." Harrison smiled and actually took out money to buy a bouquet of roses. Casually handing it to me, he said, "Emma, you can take a look at me too." The music played softly, the crowd chaotic. I heard his deep cello-like voice, warm and gentle, saying, "I can give you what he can't." I forgot how I got back to the hotel. After the usual parting with Harrison in the elevator, I swiped my room card, opened the door, and lay on the bed, staring blankly. I sighed, preparing to take a shower to calm down. Just as I took 2 steps away from the bed, my phone buzzed with a message notification. I immediately sprang back as if it were a 100-meter sprint, grabbing my phone to check. It was a message from Mason. I stared silently at the screen. The message didn't show any content, and after a moment I decisively turned off my phone, deciding I would read it after my shower. Took him so long to message me. I'll make you wait a little longer. However, I only stayed in the bathroom for 10 minutes, wrapped in a towel, before rushing out impatiently. I picked up my phone and saw, in addition to the previous message notification, 2 missed calls from Mason. Mason had sent a pitch-black picture of the night sky with the simple caption, "Finished work." I zoomed in on the picture but couldn't make sense of it. I typed out a reply, "Are you working in a coal mine?" But before I could press send, Mason's call came through. "What are you doing, Emma?" His voice sounded a little tired. I pretended to be busy and spoke with a slightly aloof tone. "Just showering." "Why? When are you coming back?" "I'll be back the day after tomorrow." "That long?" Mason fell silent for 2 seconds as if thinking about something, then continued, "Why didn't you message me? Are you really that busy?" I almost blurted out an angry retort but managed to hold it in. I was more annoyed than anything but also secretly happy, and my voice betrayed a little joy. "I'm so busy you don't message me either." "I don't believe you." Mason's voice was muffled. "You must be out on a sweet date with someone else." I felt a little guilty. I wouldn't call it a date, but it kind of felt like one, so I quickly changed the subject. "Why are you calling me?" As soon as the words left my mouth, I regretted them. "Emma, you're really shameless. Is it so wrong to want to hear your voice?" Mason's voice was magnetic, tinged with a hint of childishness, like a drenched puppy. "When you get back the day after tomorrow, don't go anywhere. Stay home and wait for me to pick you up." Just before hanging up, he said this. "Got it." I replied casually, but inside, fireworks were bursting in my heart. After the call ended, my smile didn't fade. When I locked my phone, the black screen revealed my sweet, smiling face. I immediately wiped the smile off, turning my expression into a bored, world-weary one. That night, I finally slept well for the first time in a while, dreaming no dreams. When I opened my eyes again, it was already 10 a.m. I didn't have any special plans for the day, and I wasn't particularly interested in Dejima. I lay in bed for most of the day, and after having lunch with Harrison, we planned to rest in our rooms separately. Harrison noticed that I seemed to feel better, but he didn't ask anything further. We didn't bring up last night's conversation, and everything went on as usual. He was still cold-faced and quiet, and I kept the atmosphere lively around him. Until we reached a busy shopping district, where a huge LED screen loomed over the square. The news headline flashed. Chairman of S-City's M Group passed away today in his Los Angeles mansion. The M family is traveling to the US for the funeral. I thought it was just regular news, glanced at it briefly and then moved on. But Harrison stopped, silently staring at the LED screen. "What's wrong?" I asked softly. "This man is Mason's biological father." Harrison looked at me meaningfully, then slowly added, "What?" I was so shocked I couldn't speak, staring at him wide-eyed. I had never heard Mason mention his parents, so I had just assumed he didn't have any. Now hearing this, I felt a mix of shock and confusion. But Mason doesn't have the M surname. He's the illegitimate son of the chairman of M Group and took his mother's surname. I was instantly speechless. The fact that the popular and highly sought-after Mason is the illegitimate son of the richest man in S-City. This news would be a front-page headline and trending searches would explode. I wanted to hear more from Harrison, but he remained silent, and no matter how I tried to hint at it, he wouldn't speak. I had no choice but to drop it. The first thing I did after returning to the hotel was call Mason. Finally taking the initiative? Mason's first words when he picked up the phone were casual and mocking, making me doubt Harrison's earlier explanation. Who acts like nothing's wrong after their father dies? I froze for a moment, having called just to check if Mason was okay. But now that I knew he was fine, I didn't know what to say. I stammered, "Where are you?" Before Mason could reply, a sweet, delicate voice cut in. "Mason, who are you talking to?" I froze, my heart tightening. Mason ignored her and said matter-of-factly, "The set, where else would I be?" I felt a pang of jealousy and irritability for no reason. "Oi, you're busy. I'm going for a late-night snack with Harrison." "Emma, you..." Before Mason could finish, I hung up the phone, tossed it aside, and covered my head with the blanket, too tired to even shower, just wanting to sleep. I stayed under the blanket for a while, sitting up to vent my frustration at the buzzing cicadas outside the hotel window. "Shut up, you're so loud." After that, I felt it was pointless, so I lay back on the bed, staring at the vibrant city lights outside, lost in thought. I don't know how much time passed, but just as I was about to fall asleep, my phone rang. It was Mason calling. I answered without speaking, and his deep, pleasant voice filled the phone. "Did you have a good time?" Mason's tone had a soft, almost threatening undertone. It was fine except the lamb kidneys were a bit too gamey. I said, trying to sound tough. Emma, why are you throwing a tantrum? His voice was a little helpless. I'm not throwing a tantrum. Mason, what are you talking about? I responded in a sarcastic tone without realizing it. I heard him laugh softly twice, the sound like bubbles popping, which made my ears feel weak. Then he sighed gently and gave in with a tender tone. She's the producer's daughter, just a little girl who hasn't even finished high school yet. Why are you jealous? Who's jealous? I sat up suddenly from the bed, trying to cover up my excitement by being defensive. No matter what, I'd keep my pride intact. Okay, you're not jealous. What time will you arrive tomorrow? I'll pick you up at the airport. 2 in the afternoon. Got it. Don't go anywhere, just wait for me in the arrival hall. I suddenly called his name, Mason. He gave me a lazy questioning hum. Are you okay? There's something wrong. Mason answered quickly. I was about to say something to comfort him when I suddenly heard him say, I haven't seen Emma for almost a week. I can't take it. I felt like I had missed a step, my heart floating in midair for a moment. My insides went numb. I could only respond awkwardly, I'm going to take a shower. The next day, as soon as I got off the plane, I grabbed my suitcase and found a random seat in the arrival hall. What's wrong? I'll take you back. Harrison tilted his head and said lightly. I gave him a grateful smile and shook my head. Thanks, Mr. Harrison, but I'm waiting for someone. He looked at me for a while, then nodded expressionlessly. All right. I waited for a while, but instead of Mason, Mason's assistant showed up, calling me Sister Emma, as usual. I was a little disappointed, and just as I was about to ask, where's Mason? I overheard 2 girls talking behind me. Isn't that Mason's assistant? Looks like him. How could it be? I asked the scalper. Mason doesn't have this schedule today. Not sure, let's watch for a bit. Without saying anything, I put on my mask and followed the assistant out, dragging my suitcase. It wasn't until I left the airport and saw Mason's car that I finally relaxed. With the airport being so crowded, if Mason had come personally, he'd have probably ended up trending again. The assistant helped me put my luggage in the trunk, and Mason had already opened the car door for me. Sunlight streamed through the window, casting a warm glow on his face. He looked at me, his eyes glowing like liquid gold amber. Coming back from a business trip looking so haggard. He smiled. I thought to myself, so now I look ugly to him. I plopped into the car and barely said a word before I fell asleep. In my drowsy state, I was cradled in a warm embrace. When I opened my eyes again, Mason's slightly exasperated face was in front of me. You can really sleep, huh? I've been waiting for you in the car for half an hour. I realized I had been lying on his lap and shot up in surprise, looking around. The assistant was already gone. I asked in confusion, why didn't you wake me up? Wasn't I letting you sleep more since you were so tired? Mason said as he pulled his mask up, got out of the car and grabbed my luggage. When we got home, I didn't bother unpacking. I collapsed onto the couch and Mason took off his mask, laughing as he scolded me lightly. You're so lazy. Are you hungry? I nodded. He rolled up his sleeves and walked toward the kitchen. This time I'll show you what top-tier egg noodles really taste like. While eating, I was scrolling through short videos on my phone, laughing at a funny variety show clip with a male star for a long time. Mason leaned over, glanced at the screen and said expressionlessly, do you like him? He gets scolded by his manager all the time for not washing his hair. My smile froze instantly and I turned to glare at him. In the evening, we packed up and drove to Beyoncé's concert. When we reached the arena, he stopped the car and handed me a ticket. The first row, which is extremely hard to get. You go ahead. I'll find you later, he said as he reached over to fix a stray lock of my hair. I nodded in understanding, took the ticket and headed toward the entrance. As soon as the concert began, Beyoncé appeared at the center of the stage under the stars, and the crowd erupted in cheers. I looked around, spotting middle-aged women, men holding children, and more young faces, all cheering. I was swept up in the joyous atmosphere and didn't care when Mason would show up. I waved my light stick and joined the audience in singing along. After the classic opening song, the superstar expressed her thanks to the fans. After a heartfelt speech, a tall, familiar figure appeared on stage holding a bouquet of flowers. The sharp-eyed fans, including me, immediately recognized that the person was Mason. Beyoncé smiled as she took the flowers and hugged Mason tightly, causing the crowd to burst into applause and cheers. Thank goodness the arena was open air, or I'm sure the roof would have been blown off by the deafening noise. Beyoncé grabbed the microphone again and playfully said, "Wow, the scream. I think you guys like him more than me, huh?" Laughter spread through the crowd and she then turned to Mason and said, "Well, I guess if we don't sing a song together, you won't be allowed to leave." Mason smiled politely, keeping things low-key. Beyoncé then turned serious, her voice booming. "Now I'm going to perform my favorite song for you all." "Thank you." The moment the music started, it felt like an endless summer had been set on fire. Everyone began to jump, scream, and dive headfirst into an unfathomable frenzy. I watched the familiar figure on stage. The sequins on his blue suit shimmered under the stage lights, reflecting a crisp white glow, and the tips of his fingers holding the microphone also sparkled, exuding an air of elegance. It seemed deliberate as Mason winked in my direction, causing another round of shrill screams from the girls around me. After Mason left the stage, Beyoncé sang 2 more songs. I was so absorbed that I didn't even notice a small black man, who had completely covered himself, appearing next to me. Until my arm was tugged, I turned around in surprise and hesitated before saying, "Uncle, this seat is already taken." The man paused, then roughly pulled me closer, whispering in a low voice, "Emma, take another look. Do you know who I am?" When I recognized Mason, I felt a little nervous and subtly scanned the surroundings. Once I confirmed no one was paying attention to us, I breathed a sigh of relief. Unlike the dazzling star on stage, Mason was quiet off stage. He clapped politely after each song, but for the rest of the time, I honestly wondered if he had fallen asleep. After the concert ended, he dropped me off downstairs at my building. Before I got out of the car, I couldn't help but compliment, "You look really handsome today." Mason's face turned a little red, probably from wearing the mask for too long. He turned his head, no longer looking at me, and the faintest of smiles tugged at the corner of his mouth as he casually said, "It's all right." Once home, I quickly took a shower and then collapsed into bed as if sinking into soft clouds. Before long, I had fallen into a deep sleep. But when I woke up the next day, I was stunned when I looked at my phone screen. The alarm had woken me up, and as I opened my eyes, still drowsy, I instinctively reached for my phone to check the time, only to be shocked by the headline news that popped up. Mason's rumored girlfriend spotted again, sharing a sweet gaze at the concert. My hands trembled as I clicked on the trending topic. This time it wasn't just a blurry side shot. Several videos taken from different angles of me at the concert began popping up on the trending feed. Many fans had picked apart Mason's wink from yesterday, and it was clear they had locked onto me as the woman in question. This must be the sister-in-law. The side profile is exactly the same as the one on that previous trending topic. Can't even begin to explain. Compared to the beauties in the entertainment industry, she's just so ordinary. What's Mason thinking? So disappointed. He's just a random bystander. Doesn't even like Mason's fan base, but she's just here for the attention. Why do I feel this is sweet? Someone help me. She's actually quite good looking. I'm unfollowing. No career ambition during her prime years, and all for a girl like her. To the person unfollowing, goodbye. My brother doesn't need fans who can flip on him at any time. Next, the entire internet dug deep into my life, finding my personal account, which only had 3 zombie followers. They concluded that I was just an ordinary girl you'd see anywhere. Someone commented under my Weibo post, "Haha, this is so funny. Are the boneless chicken feet from this shop really good? Now I want to try them." Got it. As long as I donate to the impoverished children in mountain areas like this sister, I'll be the next sister-in-law. But mostly there was dissatisfaction, mockery, and lofty judgments. Mason's fans began bombarding my private messages, with the more rational ones saying, "You don't deserve him," while the irrational ones sent me my obituary and lit candles. I watched for a while, feeling suffocated. Like a zombie, I went through the motions of brushing my teeth and getting ready, then headed to work. This time, I wrapped myself up tightly, standing in the corner of the subway, shrinking in fear that someone would recognize me as the ugly duckling. Suddenly, I felt something was wrong with my mask. I reached up to touch my face, only to find tears soaking through the mask. I turned off my phone, and when I arrived at the office, I saw that Harrison wasn't there. I let out a sigh of relief and collapsed onto my desk, trembling and crying silently. After crying, I stared blankly out of the window. Then after some time, I felt like crying again. Eventually, I was sniffing and trying to focus on the work in front of me. Tears were my artificial sea, and I drifted aimlessly in it all day. By the time I got off work, the overwhelming sadness from earlier had mostly faded away. I stepped out of the office, only to realize it had started to rain heavily outside. It wasn't pouring, but the light rain, accompanied by the cold wind hitting my face, stung like a slap after slap. My coat became damp as the slanting rain touched it. I leaned against a stone pillar, watching passersby rush by with umbrellas, suddenly feeling a bit lost. A Rolls-Royce slowly stopped in front of me. The people in the company had long gotten used to seeing this extravagant car, Mason's exclusive ride. Harrison didn't honk the horn. He just rolled down the window and quietly looked at me for a moment. Our eyes met, but I couldn't focus. My gaze drifted, unsure of where to land. It wasn't until Harrison, holding an umbrella, stood in front of me that I saw the softness in his eyes, and I couldn't help but tear up again. "I'm here to take you home," he said softly, reaching out to wrap his arm around my shoulder and lead me into the car. Once inside, I remembered to take off my coat, carefully folding it on my lap, afraid of dirtying his car. Harrison kept his gaze straight ahead, and after a long pause he spoke. "I've already had the PR company handle it, and the trending topic has been removed. But it didn't matter if it was removed." Still, I opened my mouth and managed to rasp out a quiet "thank you." Harrison's tone remained calm, though not as cold as before. "He looked for you for a long time. When he found out you had your phone off, he called me." I didn't respond. "Emma, if you choose him, I can take you to him right now." He paused, then continued. "But if you choose to be with me, no one will hurt you again." I shut my eyes in pain and sat in silence for a while. Slowly I said, "I just want to go home." Harrison's expression didn't change, but I could sense the brief stiffness in his posture. He didn't say anything more. The car stopped downstairs at my building. My limbs were stiff from the cold. I took a deep breath, forced a smile, and said, "Thank you, Mr. Harrison. I'll head back now." There was something unusual in Harrison's silent expression. After a moment of consideration, he sighed almost imperceptibly and said, "Actually, I've seen you before." "What?" "In middle school, in Mason's notebook. He had a picture of you pasted on the front and back cover." I didn't move, wanting to hear him out. "Do you remember what I said before? That you should stay away from him?" "I remember," I replied softly, but at this point I wasn't as curious anymore. Harrison continued, his words deliberate, almost like he was reciting a line. "Back then, Mason was taken back by the M family and placed in an elite school. He became my desk mate. We got along really well in the beginning." I looked at Harrison's face, seeing him lost in a memory. At first, everything was fine. We started to get closer and he showed me his notebook. The front and back covers had your picture on them. I teased him, calling him the pioneer of early romance, but he didn't say anything, just smiled foolishly. Later, someone leaked the fact that he was an illegitimate child of the M family, and it spread across the entire school. The group of people we used to hang out with slowly started distancing themselves from him. The silent treatment escalated, and eventually, it turned into blatant bullying. Mason was never one to be messed with. Someone bumped into him, he'd bump them back. If someone mocked him, he'd just fight back. Eventually, he became the enemy of the entire grade. Every day he was covered in bruises, and no one even bothered to show up for his parent-teacher meetings. The teacher said we should stay away from him, that we had bright futures and shouldn't get involved with someone like him. Later I stopped talking to him too. Sometimes I turned my head to see what he was doing, but I'd notice he hadn't even treated his wounds. He'd just bury himself in his diary, writing something, or sometimes just staring at your photo. My breath caught in my throat and a sharp pain ripped through my chest. Harrison turned his head and observed my expression before continuing. "One day I went to school and brought him some medicine from home. I placed it on his desk. He saw it but just threw the medicine back at me, telling me it wasn't my business and to stay away from him. He said he was annoyed every time he saw me. From that point on, we completely cut ties. Then one time Mason was surrounded and beaten up in the boys' bathroom. His ribs were nearly broken. It wasn't until then that the M family finally transferred him to another school. What happened after that, I don't know. Then by chance I met you. Honestly, I knew from the start I was never going to be the winner in this situation." "Emma." Harrison called my name, pulling me back from the brink of breakdown. He looked at me intently and said, "Call him back. He's been looking for you for a long time," and the call eventually came to me. Before I got out of the car, his last words to me were, "Take care of yourself, Emma." I felt lightheaded and the tears came uncontrollably. I decided to stop holding them back and let them flow. In a bit of a panic, I stumbled my way upstairs, took out my phone and tried to turn it on. When it powered up, I saw 28 missed calls from Mason. The most recent one was half an hour ago. Immediately after, I saw a missed call from his assistant. I wiped my tears and shakily reached for my phone to call Mason. In that moment, my mind raced. How had Mason managed to survive those days of despair and turn into the person he was now? A childhood abandoned by his parents, a life that suddenly changed, the nightmare of bullying at school. Each one of these could have crushed him. I dialed the number, desperate to hear his voice. But all I got in response was the cold, automated voice saying, "Hello, the number you have dialed is currently unavailable." I froze. Why was his phone off? I quickly called his assistant, hoping to get some answers, but as soon as the call connected, his assistant spoke in an urgent tone. "Emma, please hurry to the hospital. Mason had an accident on his way to find you." When I arrived at the hospital, a large crowd of fans had gathered outside, crying and wailing, causing a traffic jam. My assistant led me inside. The doctor had just come out of the operating room and informed me, the patient is no longer in life-threatening condition, but he is still unconscious and extremely weak. I desperately tried to rush into the ICU, but I was held back. I strained my neck to look inside and saw Mason lying in the hospital bed, hooked up to a respirator. My blood instantly froze and the world fell silent. I completely broke down, and before I knew it, everything went black as I lost consciousness. When I opened my eyes again, I saw Mason's assistant. He looked relieved, forcing a faint smile, and said, "Emma, you're finally awake. Are you feeling okay?" I weakly shook my head and with a voice barely a whisper asked, "Where's Mason?" At that moment, his smile completely faded. He shook his head sadly and said, "Mason hasn't woken up yet." My mind went blank. I took a moment to gather myself, slowly drinking some porridge, then grabbed my phone. The first thing I saw was a message from Mason sent before the accident. It was short and to the point. "Emma, answer the phone." Then I checked the trending topics. The top search, marked explosive, was Mason car accident. Right below it, another trending topic read, Mason officially confirms relationship. When I clicked on it, Mason's official announcement post popped up. He had shared a post from a marketing account that read, "Who is this?" along with various screenshots of me from Facebook with just a short caption. "Not just anyone. She's my girlfriend." At that moment, the post had over 1 million likes, comments, and shares, with many celebrities showing their support. Shortly after the accident, official reports confirmed it was a traffic incident. The public learned that a fanatic stalker of Mason, unable to accept his relationship, had rear-ended his car on the highway, causing Mason's vehicle to crash into the guardrail. The suspect has since been taken into custody. I simply stared at the screen, my tears seemingly dried up. The overwhelming sense of despair made it impossible for me to even understand what sorrow was anymore. I wanted to walk out of the hospital room to see Mason. He was so tired, so tired, and I wanted to be there with him. But just as I stepped outside, I ran into a familiar figure. I recognized her. She was Mason's nanny, who had also taken care of me warmly when I was young. I looked at her, and her face was now lined with the marks of age. When she saw me, she paused for a moment. I wanted to smile at her, but the smile wouldn't come. The next second, she hugged me and I burst into tears. It was then that I realized a person's tears could never run dry. She cried with me for a while, then pulled out a tattered diary from her bag and handed it to me. With a choked voice, she said, "I heard from relatives that in order to pull someone back from the brink of death, you have to awaken their will to live first. This is the most important thing he has. I don't dare to open it, but child, you go. Read it to him. Don't let him leave like this." I wanted to tell her that Mason wouldn't leave. The doctor said he was no longer in danger, but I found myself clutching the diary tightly, unable to speak. I could only nod. Mason had been moved from the ICU to a regular room. It was noisy outside, with fans still gathering, and the agency had sent people to try and disperse the crowd. One group would leave and then another would arrive. I approached the bed, leaned in to look at him. His pale face had no color, and he was lying there quietly as though he was just sleeping. I squatted beside the bed, forcing out a smile that looked worse than crying. My voice was hoarse as I said, "How come you can sleep better than me? Wake up." Mason didn't respond. "If you don't wake up, I'll start reading your embarrassing past." I flipped through the diary and found that photo. I always thought it was a playful photo of a little girl, but it turned out to be my student ID photo taken in 6th grade. I couldn't help but chuckle softly and glared at Mason. "Couldn't you have picked a better photo?" I kept flipping through the pages, reading the daily entries written in Mason's childish handwriting from when he was 12. December 21, 2012, Friday, sunny. Didn't the Mayans say today was the end of the world? Turns out they were lying. But Emma called me the worst villain in the world today. Sigh, it doesn't feel much different from the end of the world. August 7, 2013, Wednesday, sunny. Some strange people came to the house today. They said they were here to take me home. They were wearing suits like the ones you see in TV dramas, looking a bit fierce but also kind of cool. Am I the so-called chosen one? September 20, 2013, Friday, sunny. It's been almost a month since I came to this new school. The good part is I got a decent desk mate. This guy looks cooler than me and doesn't talk much. The bad part is I can't see Emma. So annoying. The nanny said my old man will be back soon, though I have no idea where my dad is, but I'm kind of looking forward to it. October 18, 2013, Friday, cloudy. Today some dumb dog called me a bastard. I didn't hold back and beat him up. I feel like the guys I play ball with are looking at me a little strangely. Harrison, that guy, actually started talking to me more. Looks like I've finally won him over with my enthusiasm. Yesterday I showed the old man my unit test with full marks and he didn't even praise me. So boring. October 30th, 2013, Wednesday, cloudy. Why does everyone hate me? November 5th, 2013. It hurts, 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 hurts. November 6th, 2013. This place is terrible. I want to go home, want to eat the food that Emma's grandma makes. November 17th, 2013. Emma, help me. By the time I reached the end, I was crying uncontrollably. I once thought that Mason was my salt branch in Salzburg, adorned with sparkling diamond crystals. But I never realized that he was a young boy struggling in the pitch-black fog, and because of my presence he became the brightest dancer in the long night sky. I held my breath, my face filled with disbelief. I reached out and gently touched the white sheet covering Mason, but fearing I would hurt him, I immediately withdrew my hand. Mason, wake up and be with me. I heard my own voice say. I had fallen asleep by Mason's bedside. In my dream, Mason had an expression of silent frustration and asked me when I was going to wake up. I pouted and said, "Why should I get up if you're still not awake?" He, annoyed, reached out and lightly flicked my forehead. That's how I woke up. When I opened my eyes, Mason was looking at me with the same expression of silent frustration. His tone was cold as he said, "Emma, really? Not answering the phone is one thing, but even with your boyfriend like this, you can still sleep soundly." I froze for a moment, rubbing my eyes in disbelief, thinking I was still dreaming. "How did you wake up?" I asked groggily. Mason, irritated, replied, "Should I just keep lying here then?" I burst into tears from relief and leaned my whole body onto him, sobbing uncontrollably, "You scared me to death." Mason gently rubbed my head but didn't hold back in replying, "You scared me more." I was still sniffling and crying, but the next moment Mason tilted my chin up and forced me to look at him. He looked at me seriously and said, "From now on you can't ignore my calls." I sniffed, blinking my eyes, signaling that I understood. "Say it." "I know," I mumbled. "What kind of patient is this, so fierce right after waking up?" "Oh, I guess it's my patient, spoil him then." At that moment the door was knocked. Mason's manager entered, holding an enormous bouquet of flowers. Upon seeing our affectionate gestures, he didn't even raise an eyebrow. He smiled and scolded, "You little rascal, finally decided to wake up." He placed the flowers on the bedside table and continued, "These flowers are from your fan club. There are also tons of flowers and wish notes outside the hospital, but I had someone take them and put them at the company. I've postponed your schedule for the next month. Rest well." Mason lazily nodded. My heart tightened and I nervously asked, "So, are the fans still upset?" "No, they're just relieved as long as you're alive," the manager replied to Mason, then gave some more instructions before leaving the room. Mason only stayed in the hospital for 2 days, and the doctor declared he was ready to be discharged. That afternoon, even though the company had specifically instructed the fan club not to gather at the hospital, some die-hard fans still showed up hoping to catch a glimpse of their idol. Not wanting to stir up more trouble and make a public spectacle, I decided not to go with Mason to pick him up. Sure enough, not long after, I received a barrage of desperate calls from Mason. "Why didn't you come pick me up?" Mason, after being seriously ill, seemed to have become even more childish, like a fallen star, turning into a more immature human. "I was worried about your fans being upset," I reassured him. "Don't you care about me being upset?" "I'm really upset now," he said, sounding righteous. The honeymoon phase really does make people act recklessly." The photo of Mason and me kissing downstairs from my apartment, where I was sitting on his lap, was exposed by the PR team. The manager, who had had enough, called and reprimanded us. "Can you two not be so reckless? Kissing in public. Do you want us to make a documentary of your relationship and release it worldwide?" Mason answered the phone with one hand while using the other to pinch my waist. He casually said, "Sure. Sure my ass." The manager hung up the phone angrily with a loud click. Now the whole world knows that Mason and I are dating. But what I never expected was that, as an unknown person, I would get the chance to join Mason on a variety show even though I was just a guest. The show is called Heartbeat and Heartthrobs, a variety that combines romance, escape rooms and mystery-solving elements. Mason and I were invited as guests for the first episode, with the idea of using Mason's popularity to hype things up. The show team decided to make the first episode a special one, with a mission to enter a haunted old castle filled with blood-curdling rumors and search for clues to uncover the castle's dark secrets. I'm usually pretty immune to scary stuff. I've watched horror movies repeatedly without being scared even once. Before entering the castle, Mason casually draped his arm over my shoulder and said nonchalantly, "If you're scared, just hide in my arms." This simple, everyday scene was treated like a top-tier husband spoiling his wife moment, and the photographers couldn't stop snapping pictures. I felt nothing inside but still obediently clung to Mason's arm, pretending to be the timid, fragile girl. Big brother, I'm so scared. As we walked down the long dark hallway, Mason let out a soft laugh, leaned into my ear and whispered, "Can you at least act a little more convincingly?" "All right, I'm not scared." I gave up the act, pointed to the two pitch-black paths ahead and said, "You take the left, I'll take the right. We'll split up and look for clues." Mason hesitated for a moment, then tightened his grip on my wrist and refused. "Okay, I'm scared." The photographers were at it again, clicking away. At that moment we heard running footsteps upstairs. I could tell it was the screams of the other two celebrity couples and I couldn't help but laugh. I led Mason to the left path. At the end of the path was a dim room lit only by faint candlelight. Just as we stepped inside, a long-haired female ghost dropped from the ceiling and gave us a sudden scare. Before I could react, a piercing scream came from behind us. Startled, I turned quickly to look at Mason, but he just looked at me with a blank expression, showing no signs of fear. Who was screaming? When I turned back, I saw the cameraman running out of the room, screaming and sprinting at full speed, carrying his camera with him. Mason and I were both speechless. Mason decisively threw a punch, and the ghostly puppet fell limp to the ground at our feet. He then pulled me into the room, shut the door with precision and pressed me against it. He lowered his head and kissed me. After a lingering kiss, I pulled back a little and asked, laughing, "Aren't you scared?" "You're the one who's scared." Mason leaned in and bit my lower lip, adding, "I just don't want to be apart from you." So, no matter how loud the screams from outside were, or how dramatic the sounds of chaos became, Mason and I stayed hidden in that vintage, eerie room, kissing until the end of the world came.
너와 완벽한 하루 보내고 싶어